Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. Describe what you want, and watch it take shape. You can plan, customize, and expand in any direction. From tools built for one, to platforms
alone? Did you know that we host 10 hours of free live trading every day on our YouTube channel? So join us. Earn profits while learning to trade like professionals. Why are you trading alone? Did you know that we host 10 hours of free live trading every day on our YouTube channel? So join us. Earn profits while learning to trade like professionals.
Trade gold like a professional. No guessing, no gambling, just real market execution. Join our daily live trading on gold, NASDAQ, and Bitcoin. Subscribe now. Stop following fake signals. Most traders lose because they trust random signals. Here, we trade live. Real trades, real entries, real results. Subscribe now. This is not a signal channel. This is real trading, real decisions, real money. Gold, NASDAQ, and crypto. Live every day. Subscribe now.
If you struggle with knowing whether a trend is likely to continue or reverse, this is the video for you, because in this video I'm sharing a 100% mechanical way to know whether a trend is likely to continue or you're about to get that reversal, helping you stay on the right side of the market. So if you're new here, my name is Justin Bennett, founder of Daily Price Action, Forex trader since 2007, full-time trader since 2011. All right, so in this video we are talking about SMC market structure. Okay, so for some of you this could be familiar, for others this is going to be brand new. Now, for those of you where this is brand new, I want to start with some basic concepts here. And even if you know SMC, even if you know SMC market structure and you're familiar with it, I urge you to pay attention here, even through this part, because you might learn something new. Okay, so looking at this blank chart, right? Let's start here, because before we get into an actual chart, I want to explain what defines a market uptrend, downtrend, and consolidation, and also those key terms that we need to know in order to put this method into practice. So the very first thing, let's go ahead and draw out some very simple lines here. Okay, so we're going to draw, first of all, an uptrend up here. So higher highs and higher lows. Most of us are very familiar with that. And then we also have a consolidation period, right? So these are the three, essentially the three things that a market can do, right? You can either get consolidation like this, where the market just goes sideways. You can have an uptrend, or you can have the market moving in a downtrend. Okay, so lower highs and lower lows. So most of us are familiar with this. Now, what you might not be familiar with are terms like internal and external highs and lows. So let's discuss that for a moment before we get into a couple of SMC terms that you need to know. So the first one is going to be the fact that in any given time frame, you're going to have internal time frames. Now, with the exception, obviously, of the 1 minute chart, although you could even make the case that the 1 minute chart has the 1 second chart if your platform has it. But really, for most time frames, you are going to have internal time frames. Okay, so in other words, you are going to have a case where you have these external highs and lows. So if we assume for a moment that this is an hourly time frame, okay, so these highs and lows are on the hourly chart. So within this, what you're going to have is you're going to have lower time frame highs and lows along the way. Okay, so it's going to look something like this, right? Really choppy and very kind of almost erratic, right? Within this trend. So what this is showing you here is these internal highs and lows right here fit within this hourly trend. Remember, this is our hourly trend. So this right here, these highs and lows could be something like a 5 minute. Okay, so you're going to have these internal highs and lows along the way. So these are all internal, and these up here that you see are external. Okay, so in terms of market structure, this is really, really critical. In terms of market structure, you always want to pay attention to the external highs and lows. So all of this through here, if this is an hourly time frame, all you're looking at are these hourly highs and lows. We don't really care about what's happening here in the middle. Okay, so the only thing that's going to give us a directional bias on the hourly time frame are those highs and lows that are occurring on the hourly time frame, not the 5 minute, not the 15 minute. Okay, so that's the very first thing to understand. The same thing goes for a downtrend and even consolidation. You have external highs and lows, and you have those internal highs and lows as well. Okay, so you have something like this here, you know, within this trend. So if this is an hourly chart, you have highs and lows that develop through here. You know, something like this, obviously a little bit messy, but just getting my point across here, where you have these highs and lows on the hourly, and then you've got these internal highs and lows. So this internal structure within this external structure. The only thing we care about in terms of market structure when we're looking at SMC is going to be these external highs and lows. Okay, so another way to say that is if you are on an hourly time frame, and this is a question that I get a lot, where if you're on the hourly time frame, everybody says, well, what about the 15-minute? What about the 5-minute? How do we account for all these different time frames? Because you could essentially have a market, and you do have a market in this case that is in an uptrend on the hourly. However, on the 5-minute, it could be in a downtrend, right, within this leg. So people ask, well, how do you account for all of that? And my answer is always pick a lane, pick a time frame, and use that time frame and forget everything else. Now, you could have multiple time frames, and in fact, you probably should, and I do, with regard to identifying a directional bias, and then also refining your entries. So you can have multiple time frames, but what you don't want to do is get in this endless loop of trying to identify every single time frame and the highs and lows on those time frames, because you will drive yourself absolutely crazy. Okay, so just pick a lane, pick a time frame. In my opinion, the hourly is a great place to start because it's going to give you a couple of opportunities every week, but it's not such a low time frame where you're going to get a lot of noise. And that's the second thing I want to talk about here, is that if you try to identify something like this, right, the highs and lows on a 5-minute time frame, what you're going to notice is that you're going to have a lot of noise. Okay, you're going to have a lot of noise to the point where it becomes difficult to try to define what the market is doing at any given time. So I think the hourly, maybe the 30-minute time frame is a great place. The 4 hour is also a great place, although you're going to get less opportunities if you're on the 4 hour or daily time frames. Okay, so we talked about the 3 things that markets can do. They can either trend higher, trend lower, or consolidate, right? And we've also discussed external highs and lows versus internal highs and lows. We want to use these external highs and lows. Now, another thing we need to discuss here before we get into an actual chart is going to be two SMC terms called the break of structure and change of character. Okay, so let's bring up the text tool here and write these out so you guys can become really familiar with this. So we have break of structure, and this is going to be abbreviated as BOS. Okay, so we have break of structure, and the second one is going to be a change of character. Okay, so next is going to be change of character, and this is abbreviated by CHOCH. All right, so we have break of structure, change of character. Now, if you're not familiar with SMC, this might sound a little bit odd, because if you first hear break of structure, what you're thinking is that is a break of a trend. Okay, in other words, you have a structure being an uptrend and it's a break. However, that is not the case. So a break of structure here is actually a trend continuation. Okay, so break of structure is trend continuation. The idea being that when you have the market actually breaking a high, so in this case we have this uptrend on the hourly, you have the market breaking that high, this is the break of structure right here. So break of structure meaning that within this uptrend you have the market consolidating back here, and then you have the break of structure and that continuation. Okay, so break of structure equals a trend continuation, so therefore we can say that a change of character is a trend reversal. Okay, now change of character sounds odd, right? When you first hear this, you're going to think that's a really strange name for a trend reversal, until you realize that there are 2 characters in the market. So we have a bull and a bear, right? 2 characters in any market, and so a change of character is literally going from a bull to a bear or a bear to a bull. So once you understand that, change of character takes on a whole new meaning. So we have trend continuation, trend reversal. Okay, so let's talk about these two in terms of this chart over here, these drawings that we've made, and identify what is a break of structure, what is a change of character. So in this case right here, we have this high within an uptrend. Okay, so as soon as we close above this high, and this is key, you have to close above this high. So if this is an hourly chart, you have to get an hourly close above this level. And we'll look at a real chart here in a moment on the Euro USD, but for now I want to stick with this because it's just very simple to help you guys grasp these terms. So this right here, you need an hourly close above this high back here. If it's a wick, it does not count. And so you need that close above. This is a break of structure, or BOS, okay? And the only thing that this tells us, this is not a key level. For those of you coming from price action, you're going to be tempted to treat these levels that we're going to draw within the chart above as key levels. In other words, you're going to look at this and say the market's breaking out, I want to buy against this, and that is not what you want to do, because in most cases, what you're going to get is the market actually dropping below here, right, back down here into discount or inefficiencies that build up down here. and then continuing within this trend, okay? So we'll talk about that more in later videos. This video specifically is just defining SMC market structure and how to use breakout structure and change of character to make sure you're staying on the right side of the markets. So we have this breakout structure here. Let's go ahead and label this so we stay clear, right? So breakout structure, BOS, okay? So again, same thing up here. You can see where we had the close above this high. And the only thing that this is telling us, this is not a breakout, okay? This is not a breakout. This is simply the market just telling us that buyers remain in control, okay? So I don't want you guys thinking that this is a breakout, again, in the sense that we have a break and you want to buy against this level, because in a lot of cases, again, what you'll see is the market will drop well below it back here into some inefficiencies to clean up the liquidity that was left behind during this move and then continue in that direction. So if you start thinking of these as breakouts and buying against these levels, you're going to get yourself in trouble, okay? So breakup structure, breakup structure. Now, let's talk about for a moment a change of character, okay? And obviously the same thing applies here for this downtrend where you have the lows down here, right? This would be a bearish breakup structure where you get the market actually closing below this low back here. So bearish breakup structure here and also bearish breakup structure here. Okay, so again, this just tells us that sellers are in control back here and that buyers are in control up here. That is the only thing that we're doing here, okay? Now, let's talk about a change of character. How does that look? So if we take this here as our uptrend and we map out something like this, let's say we get the pullback here, the market comes up, makes a lower high, although it doesn't have to, but this is a stronger reversal signal, which I'll explain in future videos as well. But this right here, okay, if you get something like this, what happens here is on the way up, you're marking these levels and you're saying, okay, these are the levels that buyers have to defend, right? Because it's an uptrend, you don't want to see the market closing below these lows. Okay, so it didn't here, we got the bullish breakup structure, buyers are in control, and the same thing back here. So we had this low right here, we had a breakup structure on this high, so we had to close above, and then what we had is sellers taking over and closing the market below this low back here. Now, here's an important part, is that any change of character has to originate from the low, the last low in this case, that produced the breakup structure. So in other words, this last breakup structure was up here, okay, so this high. If we take this and follow this back to the last low, it was this one, okay? So this change of character right here, once we close below, this is the low we have to use. It's the last low that triggered the breakup structure, okay? So this right here, let's just keep it clean here and label this as our change of character, okay? So that's our change of character. This right here tells us that sellers are now in control and we want to be looking for shorts only. Okay, so shorts only here against inefficiencies. Once we get that change of character, back here, buys only because we know buyers are in control, all right? And the same thing down here. Let's go ahead and run through this here quickly before we get into a chart. So let's say we have the market putting in a retracement here, puts in a higher low, and again, it doesn't have to. And here's, okay, actually, you know what, this is a good stopping point because what happens a lot of times is this, right? So if you'll notice here, we have this high back here. And again, when the market's trending lower, what you can do, especially when you're practicing this stuff, is just draw horizontal levels, and you'll see this in the Euro chart above once we run through this, but just draw your horizontal levels, right, in a downtrend like this, and say, okay, these are the levels that sellers have to defend. As long as we're doing that and we're producing these breakup structures, then sellers are in control. Now, as soon as we get a break above this, buyers are in control. However, what tends to happen is in this case, if you have this low right here that doesn't take out this one, that doesn't close below, what happens is a lot of traders start to use this high. And they look at this and they say, okay, this is a change of character. Now, it could work out, okay, that could be. However, technically speaking, this is not the high that you should be using. And the reason for that, it goes back to the fact that any change of character, right, has to originate from, in this case, the high that produced the last breakup structure. So, in other words, if we look here at this, okay, so this breakup structure right here, if we move this over, right, copy this over, this was our last breakup structure. We got the close below this low right here, okay, so we closed below here. This high up here was the high that produced the last breakup structure. Therefore, this is the high that you need to mark out, not this stuff here. And this goes back to what we discussed earlier about external highs and lows and internal highs and lows. All of this right here is internal. It's all internal to this right here, this high and this low. If you notice, all of these right here, this high, this low, this high, this low, all of this is internal to this high up here and this low down here. Okay, so that's very important that you have to, anytime you're dealing with a change of character, it has to originate from, in this case, the last high that produced the last break of structure. Okay, so if we walk this forward here, let's finish this up and then we'll get into a Euro USD real chart to explain this. So if in this case we were to get the move above here like this, then that right there is your change of character. Okay, so the change of character actually happens over here, not within this. So this right here now becomes our change of character. Okay, because you could have, in this case, you could have had the market do this, and you think that this high right here is the change of character, and the market's flipping bullish, and then it could have just continued lower. Okay, so it's very important to confirm this with these external highs and lows and not the internal highs and lows. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on now and look at a real example here, a real chart on the Euro USD. We're going to use the hourly time frame just because I do think it's a great time frame to use, especially if you're learning this stuff, because the issue is if you drop too low of a time frame, then you're going to get a lot of noise. It's going to be difficult to determine what those external highs and lows are. So even this right here, and by the way, I'm not cherry picking this. This is literally the last couple months of the Euro USD price action. So you could do this on any chart, any time frame it works. But again, I do suggest that when you're learning this stuff, to kind of stick to the hourly or above. You could drop to the 30-minute or even 15, but again, the lower you go, the more noise you're going to have in the chart. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this forward now. And as we do this, I'm going to go ahead and mark out these highs and lows. So here we have a downtrend clearly, right? We have a downtrend here in the Euro USD. So during this time frame, what we would do is we would go ahead and just look at these highs and lows to determine, right, when we have the break of structure or the change of character. So in this case here, you can see that we do have a break of structure off of this low down here. So off of this low, we have a break of structure, right? And this is a bearish break of structure because we are in a downtrend. Okay, so this is the high up here that has to be defended. Now, as soon as we get a break of structure, okay, so this is great now that we're real time here because you can see we had the break of structure that closed below that confirmed that sellers remain in control. Now, at this time too, what you can do when you're learning this stuff is you can go ahead and draw out a horizontal line off of this high up here now. And the reason for this is because this is the move right here. This is the high that triggered this break of structure, okay, to the downside. So if we play this forward now, let's see what we get here, okay? So the euro is coming up now and testing that high. And what you can see right there, guys, this is really important because this right here, this close above, is a change of character, okay? So again, we have the last high that produced the last break of structure, okay? So if we have this low down here that produced the break of structure, we follow this back to the last high, it's this one right here. And if you'll notice too, this isn't just a fluke or getting lucky in this case, because if you'll notice during this downtrend, what you can see here is that we had a series of lower highs and lower lows. Okay, so the market never did this before. If you'll notice, all of these highs up here are lower highs. This right here is really the first higher high within this downtrend. Okay, so this right here, the close above, is our change of character. Okay, so let's go ahead and label that to keep things straight here. So change of character here, I'm going to remove this for now, keep things clean. Okay, so that is our change of character. Now at this point we know that within this downtrend, buyers are starting to take control. The key word there is starting though, because there are no guarantees in the market ever, even if you have full confirmation. But in this case, we have the start of a potential reversal. So at this point, if you were looking for shorts during this downtrend, this would be a good time to pause and say, okay, wait a second, buyers are starting to take control. We're seeing some strength now in this market. This was a pretty aggressive move up, and we also closed above this high, right? That last high that produced the break of structure. So at this point, if you were shorting, you probably want to stop, right? Not financial advice, but that's always the best thing to do here when you see the market finally starting to turn. And so with this now, and again, here's where traders get themselves in trouble because they look at this as a breakout and they think, okay, if we close above here, then I want to buy against this high. And that 9 times out of 10 is going to get you in trouble. And that's not what we want to do here. In future videos, I will talk about entry methods and how to use this, really the same method in order to confirm entries. But that's not really the way to go here, because if you start doing that, what you're going to find is that inefficiencies build up along the way, and the market has a way of coming back here and tagging these inefficiencies down here before moving higher. Okay, so if we go ahead and play this out now, and again, this right here, guys, it's important too. This change of character, the only thing this close above this high tells us is that buyers are starting to take control. That is it. This is not a key level in the market. Yes, it is off of this high, but the only thing this serves right now is just to tell us that buyers are starting to take control, okay? Let's go ahead and play this forward now and see what we get. So here we have the market dropping down here, and this is what I mean. We're dropping down there into those sell side inefficiencies that developed along this move, okay? So now we have the move back up here, and before we get there, I'm also going to draw a level off of this high, okay? Because this now becomes the high that the market has to break out in order to give us that first higher high. We've had the change of character back here, but we want to see that, that confirmation that buyers are truly taking control. Okay, and if you'll notice here, we move up and test the level a couple of times, don't break through, and this right here, this wick does not count. Okay, the wick does not count because we're on the hourly time frame. This was an hourly wick. We did not close a candle above this. Okay, so let's go ahead and keep moving forward. Okay, and on that candle right there, what you can see here is that we finally got the close above. Okay, so we got the close above here. So this now is a break of structure. Okay, because now we're bullish, right? We have the change of character back here, break of structure once we close above. So this right here too, as soon as we get this close, what we can do is go back to the last low that produced this. So we had the close above up here. This was the low that produced that break. Okay, so this is the low now that you want to see the market hold above. You do not want to see the euro closing an hourly candle below this low here. Okay, so if we now map this out, so this is our low now that we've had the break of structure that buyers have to defend. Okay, so we have the break of structure. Let's play this forward and see what we get. Okay, so moving forward, you can see we're kind of consolidating here a little bit. We did drop below that break of structure, but again, these are not key levels. All this is serving is just to tell us that the market is, in an uptrend, buyers are in control. Now, once we had this too, I should have mapped this out earlier, but once we had that break of structure, this becomes our new high, right? So this is now the new high that buyers have to break above. And what you'll notice back here is that we did not close above it here. We wicked above. We didn't quite close above here. We did close above through here. So once we have this, once again, buyers are in control. That's the only thing this is telling us. It is not a key level. In future videos, I'll get into areas of interest, how to define those, and also where to enter into trends like this, okay? So break of structure right there. And once we have that break of structure, we can move this level up, because once again, in an uptrend, this is now the low that buyers have to defend. And the reason we know that it's this low is because, again, this was our new break of structure here. If we move back from this, okay, this was the last low. So this is the low that buyers have to defend now. So moving forward, let's see what we get. Okay, so we're pulling back now into inefficiencies down here, right? And now that we've had a pullback, right, this high up here becomes the level to watch. Okay, now what defines a pullback for me is I want to see at least a few candles pulling back. I mean, ideally, you want to see a few candles in a row pulling back on the hourly. So in other words, you want to see at least, 3 or 4, ideally even like 5. And here we had 4 red candles right here on the hourly pulling back. So once I have that, I know that this is now kind of my high to watch within this trend, where we could get an additional break of structure, or we could get a reversal materializing from this, okay? But that becomes the high now to watch for the Euro USD. All right, so moving forward, we're just consolidating, going sideways. We don't have a break of structure, and now what you'll notice is that we have this big sell-off here from the Euro. Now, here's a great point as well, because all of this sideways consolidation, the thing to remember is that the low that produced the last break of structure, so the last BOS was this right here, okay? So this area through here, once we closed above, that was the last break of structure within this uptrend. Okay, so if we track back to the last low, now you could technically use this one. However, what you'll notice is that we only had 1, 2 candles pulling back. So for me, that's a little bit too shallow. It's a little too shallow for me to call this the low that buyers have to defend. Okay, although in this case, it would have worked out because you would have had a change of character over here, and then you can see we got a lower high. But for me, if I'm trading this real time, just full transparency, I'm looking at this low down here. Because again, this pullback isn't quite enough. It's a little too shallow for me to use this low. I'm looking at this low right here that produced this break of structure, okay? So this is the low that buyers have to defend. They failed over here. You can even see where we got the bounce right here on this candle, but they failed right here, making this a bearish change of character. Okay, so we flipped from bullish to bearish. So if we label this here as a change of character, this is where sellers start to take over, because notice back here, we did wick above it just barely. Okay, on this candle right here, we wicked above, we didn't close above. So this was the high, we wicked above, we got a lower high, we broke down, breaking this low over here, giving us that change of character, okay? So if we play this forward now, let's see what we get here from the Euro. Okay, so we have the change of character. We know that sellers are starting to take control, or or regain control really. And so if we move this forward, you can see where, again, if you had treated this as a key level and you were trying to short against this, you would have gotten yourself in trouble, because this right here probably would have stopped you out. So that's not what we want to do. All this is serving, the only purpose of this is to tell us that sellers are taking control, okay? So playing this forward, you can see we got a continuation. Now, once we had this move up, okay, what you'll notice here is that we had 1, 2, 3, 4 candles, 1, 2, 3 candles on the bullish side. So this right here serves as our retracement. Okay, now I'm pointing that out because then this becomes the high that sellers have to defend. And we know that this is the high sellers have to defend because we now have a bearish break of structure. Okay, so this low down here got taken out. So this was the low that sellers had to take out in order to confirm a continuation. Okay, so this was a bearish break of structure right here. This is the high now that sellers have to defend. Okay, so once we play this forward, let's see if we get a retracement here. And you can see that we did get a few candles here pulling back. Okay, so for me, this qualifies, right? We had 3 candles right here pulling back into this sell-off. So 3 bullish candles. This low down here now is the level that sellers have to break. And you can see where we did get that. Okay, so if we take this here, move it down off of this low. Again, the reason I'm using this low now is because we did have a retrace into this sell-off. We had 3 candles here, so that qualifies. This is now my low. You can see we had a break of structure, okay? So once we have that, all we do is we take this high up here, we move it down off of this high. Now, here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because you could say, okay, well, it could be this high right here because this produced the break of structure, or this one up here. Personally, I like to keep it conservative. I like to say that, you know what, if buyers are going to take control again, I want to see them take out this high, not necessarily this one, okay? So that now is the high that sellers have to defend. And we now have a new break of structure, giving us the indication that sellers remain in control. Okay, so again, during this entire time, following this right here, this change of character back here, this told us that we wanted to start looking for shorts on strength, okay? So shorts through here, obviously back here when the market was in an uptrend, we wanted to be looking for buys only. So this just helps you stay on the right side of the market. And you'll see here as I play this forward that we do get, the continuation down here. And then we have, let's see, a pullback here. That qualifies as a pullback right there because, again, on the hourly time frame, we have multiple green candles here in a row, okay? So that means that this low now becomes the level sellers have to take out for a break of structure, and they do. So we take this here, copy this down, off of this low, we have a new break of structure. Again, sellers remain in control. Now that we have this here, we can take this level up here and drag it off of this high. Again, I'm using the conservative level here, which is this high up here, not this one. And that can matter in some cases, guys, because you could get the market actually, closing above here, but not closing above here. So I would have to see buyers take out this high back here, now that we've had that bearish break of structure, to really confirm that buyers are regaining control. Okay, so playing this forward, you can see where we got the move up. And this right here, we have 1, 2, not quite what I need. However, if you'll notice back here, we did have a few green candles. Now we pretty much went sideways there, but that could still be a significant low there for the euro. And it would be enough that in real time, I would plot a level off of this one here, just because, things are getting pretty tight here for the euro. But that's also kind of what we've seen here this year. So it kind of matches the price action we've seen. So this is now the low that sellers have to take out to give us a bearish break of structure. And you can see right there, we did it, okay? So we got the close below, we have a break of structure, okay? And you can notice too, this high never got taken out, right? So this is just a series of lower highs here for the euro, right? We never took out this high back here. Sellers remain in control, break of structure back here, break of structure now over here, okay? So sellers remain in control. So again, this just tells us that we want to be looking for shorts only right now. All right, so let's play this forward and see what we get. Okay, now right there, you can see that we did get a few green candles. So what I can do is I can drag this now off of this low down here, right? And this becomes now the level the sellers have to break in order to confirm a new break of structure, okay? So playing this forward now, let's see what we get here from the euro. We go sideways for a bit, we test that level, we do not close below, we wick below it. But remember, this is not enough to confirm a break of structure. We need to close below. Okay, now what you're gonna notice here is that we do have the euro moving above these highs over here. So consolidation through here, and we have the euro breaking above. Now, this could be kind of hinting at a reversal, okay? But in terms of SMC market structure though, what you would have to see is you would really have to see, in my opinion, this high back here taken out. And the reason for that is, again, we go back to the last high that produced the breakup structure, right? We had 3 up candles here. Okay, so I can use this high. We had the breakup structure to the downside on this candle. So if we track back from this low here, again, remember, we didn't have a breakup structure over here, so we can't use this high. So this was our breakup structure. This is the low here. So if we track back to the last high, it's this one right up here. So really, even though you have the market taking out these highs, technically for this to be a true change of character, we would have to, if the euro had closed below here, right, closed below this low, then you could use this high. But because we didn't do that, this is our last low, this is the last high that produced that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. This is really the level now that buyers have to take out. Okay, so let's play this forward and see what we get. And you can see we are rallying up here toward the level, and right there we did close above. Okay, so even this right here, even this small close above, you can see this is right off of that high. Even this close above right here tells us that buyers are now in control. So this tells us right here that we are now looking for buys, because this tells us that buyers are regaining control. So this becomes our change of character, right? And this down here was never a breakup structure because we did not close below. Okay, so bullish change of character right there, telling us that buyers are starting to take control. And let's play this forward and see what we get. Now in this case, we really, probably didn't get much of a pullback if I remember correctly. And this does happen sometimes where, and I'll talk about this in future videos, but when you get a market doing this, 8 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10 even, you get the market pulling back here into areas like this before moving higher. Okay, and I remember this actually at the time. I was looking for buys down here against this area of interest, and we just didn't get it in this case, and that does happen from time to time. But the point here is that this right here, okay, identifying this kind of market structure here and identifying our change of character, breakup structure, all of that off these highs and lows, this right here would have told us that we're no longer looking for shorts. Okay, we're no longer looking for shorts. And just think about how, how much trouble that could keep you out of, right? If we take a look here and go back and just look at what we've done so far, you can see that this back here, okay, so let's map this out. This back here was the bullish change of character right here. So this meant that we were looking for buys, right? Look at where this occurs within this downtrend. Now over here, we had the bearish change of character over here, right? So from uptrend over here to downtrend, right? So change of character from here. Again, change of character from right over here. We confirm it right here. So bearish this entire time and then bullish over here, okay? So you can kind of see, guys, how this is incredibly significant and to really help you stay on the right side of the market. And if we play this forward, you'll notice that the market does go into an uptrend from here, okay? So higher highs and higher lows. It does get kind of choppy, but again, if you were a buyer and you were looking for buys here, then you would be on the right side of the market following this bullish change of character, okay? So you can do this in any market. It works in any market on any time frame. But again, I really do advise to stick with the hourly, maybe 4-hour time frame. You could drop down to the 30-minute time frame, but I really would not try to do this on the 5-minute. Stay on those somewhat higher time frames when you're starting out, because it's going to provide less noise on the chart and just make it easier to go through this. So if you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel. Also smash that like button, because I have a lot more SMC content like this coming out every single week.
A lot of pop science outlets give a certain summary of quantum computing that I can almost guarantee leads to misconceptions. The summary goes something like this. In a classical computer, data is stored with bits, some sequence of ones and zeros, but in a quantum computer, you are able to represent every possible sequence of bits of some fixed length all at once, in one big thing known as a superposition. And sometimes the implication of these summaries is that quantum computers can be faster by basically doing whatever a classical computer would do, but to all of these sequences in parallel. Now, this does gesture at something that's kind of true, but let me see if I can prove to you why I think this leads to misconceptions, and I'll prove it using a quiz. To set it up, I want you to imagine that I have a mystery function, and I tell you that there's a certain secret number among all the numbers from 0 up to n-1, where if you plug that value into my function, it returns true, but if you were to plug in any other value, it returns false. And let's say you can't look at the innards of the function to learn anything about it. The only thing you're allowed to do with it is just try it out on numbers. The warm-up question is, how many times, on average, would you have to apply this mystery function in order to find the secret key? Well, if the setup was in an ordinary classical computer, there's really nothing better that you can do than guess and check. You go through all the numbers, and maybe you're lucky and find it early, maybe you're unlucky and it doesn't come up until later, but on average, with a list of n possibilities, it takes 1/2 of n attempts to find the key. Now, in computer science, people care about how runtimes scale. If you had a list 10 times as big, how much longer would it take? And computer scientists have a way of categorizing runtimes. They would call this one O of n, where that big O communicates that maybe there's some constants like the 1/2, or maybe some factors that grow slower than n. But the factor of n is what explains how quickly it scales as n grows. If n goes up by a factor of 10, the runtime also goes up by a factor of 10. Now, here's your quiz. For the equivalent of this setup, but in a quantum computer, what's the best runtime for finding the secret key? I've asked a variant of this quiz many times in a certain lecture that I've given over the years, and the options I typically offer are O of square root of n, O of log of n, O of log of n, and O of 1, where here O of 1 would mean that the runtime is just some constant that doesn't actually grow as n grows. Now, to be fair, I have not defined quantum computing. In fact, doing so from the ground up is going to be the goal of this video. So without showing you what this mystery function would look like in that setting, it's kind of an incoherent question. But it's not really meant as a quiz that I'm grading you on or anything, it's just meant to be a gut check of intuition before we dive in. In principle, it's the same task, finding a needle in a haystack where you want to discover which value out of many options uniquely triggers some function. I asked this as a YouTube post last month, which 100,000 of you kindly answered. The most recent time I gave it live was to a group of Stanford students. I also posed it to those attending the International Math Olympiad, and in all of these and many other instances, the answer distribution looks very similar. The most common answer is always O of 1, and this is wrong, and I'm pretty sure that it stems from that misleading summary. That summary implies that you would put all of the n values that you need to search into this mysterious superposition, and then you would process them all in parallel, and then somehow the answer would be revealed. The second most common answer is typically O of log of n, and this is also wrong. You would call this an exponential speedup. For example, if you increase the size of the list by factors of 10, an O of log n runtime would only tick up by the same additive increment each time. Now, this wrong answer, I suspect, stems from a misconception about how much better quantum computers are in general. There are very certain special problems where you can achieve an exponential speedup. The most famous case is probably Shor's algorithm for factoring large numbers, but most problems are not like that. In this case, the correct answer is O of square root of n, and this is a lot more representative of the typical speedup that you could get with a quantum computer. In 1994, it was proven that a quantum computer could not possibly do any better than O of square root of n on this task. And then 2 years later, Love Grover found a specific procedure that actually achieves that runtime. So searching through a bag of 1,000,000 options takes on the order of 1,000 steps. A bag of 1,000,000,000,000 options takes on the order of 1,000,000. This big O actually hides something that's pretty fun, which is the constant of pi fourths in the precise runtime, and that pi has its own whole fun story to tell, which I'll get to later. You might think that this puzzle with a mystery function triggered by one specific value is super contrived, but I want you to keep in mind this is meant to be a generic stand-in for any problem where you know how to quickly verify a solution, even if you don't know how to find that solution in the first place. This describes an enormous class of problems in computer science known as NP problems. So while a square root speedup is frankly not as earth-shattering as an exponential speedup would be, and while big O runtimes are often a lot less important than other practical considerations, it is thought-provoking that something like Grover's algorithm is even possible at all, providing this catch-all method for speeding up any NP problem. My goal with this lesson is to build up to a step-by-step walkthrough of how that algorithm works. It's actually very geometric and very beautiful, but we need to build up a lot of background in order to get there. The first 2/3 or so of the video will be spent building up the fundamentals of quantum computing, not with a set of analogies, which as we've seen can lead to misconceptions, but as a piece of math, which I think offers you a pair of glasses through which you can see a much more honest depiction of the whole field. This is one of those topics that has a few premises that are just going to feel a little bit strange at first, and I should warn you they take a little getting used to. My current plan is to follow this lesson with another one about some of the underlying physics, which hopefully can help motivate a few of the odd-looking rules that you'll see here. But today the goal is to provide the minimal viable path to seeing a genuine bona fide quantum algorithm. Let me pull up again that contrast between classical computing and quantum computing, and let's see if we can build up something of a more representative mental model. It is true, of course, that data in a classical computer looks like a series of ones and zeros, and at a higher layer of abstraction, that might represent an actual data type, like an integer or some text, And at a lower layer of abstraction, those ones and zeros represent some actual thing in the physical world, like voltages across a capacitor or something like that. Now, these same layers of abstraction provide a pretty helpful framing when we discuss quantum computing. Over there, there's also some underlying physical measurement, and again, you represent the outcome of that measurement with some sequence of ones and zeros, and again, this might implement some actual data type that you care about, like a number. This symbol that I'm showing, by the way, is called a ket. I'll explain it properly in a couple minutes, but for right now, just think of it as conveying that something is coming from a quantum computer. Let's start things off with a description of quantum computing through the lens of that middle layer of abstraction, meaning we're going to postpone all of the underlying physics for now, which is a little bit like teaching computer science without discussing hardware. In a classical computer, there's no need to distinguish between the state of memory and what you read out from the memory. Both of them just look like the same sequence of bits. But it's a very different story in a quantum computer. Our main job today is going to be to understand something called the state vector, which is continuous. This is the thing the computer actually operates on, but it has a very unusual relationship with the values that you actually read out, those discrete sequences of bits. Before I can define the state vector, you need to know one other key difference from classical computers, which is that this value that you read out, which again just looks like some sequence of ones and zeros, is random. Or to be a little more accurate, I should say it's typically random. The way you can think about this is that if you run a program on a quantum computer, that program doesn't necessarily determine a particular output. Instead, it determines a probability distribution across all possible outputs. So for the example I'm showing on screen, this would be a very small quantum computer where the thing that you read out has 4 bits, meaning that there are 2 to the 4 or 16 possible outputs, and the specific program you run determines some kind of distribution across all those possible outputs. Some programs might manage to concentrate more probability on just one of those outputs, but other programs might give a more even spread across everything. This example, by the way, where the thing you read out has 4 bits, would be called a 4-qubit quantum computer. And more generally, if you have a k-qubit quantum computer, that means there are 2 to the k distinct possible outputs, and any program gives a distribution across all of those, and the thing that you read out has k distinct bits. That word qubit, by the way, is another thing I'm going to define more precisely in just a minute. I do want to emphasize that this distribution is implicit. You never actually see it directly, you instead infer what it must be based on the program that you run. You never see all bit strings coexisting at once in some kind of way. You just see one of them, drawn at random, according to this distribution. At a lower layer of abstraction, what I'm describing as reading out from memory looks like a physical measurement, and the randomness stems from the laws of quantum mechanics. If you're curious about the physics, that lower layer of abstraction, that's exactly what the next video is for. Up in this layer, you just think about probability distributions over all possible bit strings. Now, one more funny rule here, which does bubble up from the underlying quantum mechanics, is that after you read out from memory and you see some particular value, the underlying state of the computer changes such that now all of the probability is concentrated on whatever value you read out. So if you kept reading out from memory over and over, you would just keep seeing that same value. You might imagine these programs as creating a very delicate and sensitive probability distribution, where the moment you look at it, sampling from that distribution, the whole thing collapses to one value. Now you might be wondering, where does this distribution come from? This is both the most important and the most confusing part. You think of the state of the computer as being described by a big vector. Right now when I say the word vector, you can just think big list of numbers, although as you'll see later on, it can be helpful to think of this as a direction in some super high dimensional space. Each component of this vector corresponds to one of the possible values you might read out, one of those distinct bit strings. So in this example where what you read out has 4 bits, the state vector would have 16 distinct components. The state vector is not the same thing as the probability distribution over all possible outputs, but it is very closely related. The fundamental rule, which I admit is going to look very strange at first, is that if you take the magnitude of each component in that state vector and you square it, that gives you the probability of seeing the corresponding output, the corresponding bit string. Let me just say up front, a lot of people learning quantum computing find this state vector a bit weird. What is it actually, and why are we squaring things to get probability? As it is, for the sake of simplicity, there's a certain important detail that I'm neglecting until the end of the video here. I just want to flag that for most people, this takes a little getting used to. And to be super clear on what I mean with the fundamental rule here, let's suppose that after this program processes this vector, maybe the component of it associated with some specific bit string, like, I don't know, 0011, happened to be 0.5. Then when you square that value, 0.5 squared is 0.25, so the observable implication of this is that when you read out from memory, you have a 25% chance of seeing that bit string, 0011. One thing I'll highlight is that it is perfectly valid for the values in the state vector to be negative, and at first you might think that has no real impact, since flipping the sign doesn't change the square, and therefore all the probabilities stay the same. It is true that the probabilities stay the same, but we absolutely consider this to be a distinct state, and as you'll see, the idea of flipping signs plays a very central role in Grover's algorithm. Here, this example with 4 qubits has kind of a lot on screen with not a lot of visualization to back it up, so let's scale things down to the smallest possible case where the computer has just 2 possible outputs, represented with a 0 and a 1. In this simplest possible case, the state vector would only be 2-dimensional, so we can actually represent it geometrically as an arrow inside a 2D space. In this case, the x-coordinate corresponds to the outcome 0, in the sense that the square of that coordinate tells you the probability that when you read out from the computer, you would read a 0. Here, maybe it's helpful if I add a little bar to show that probability. And you'll notice that as the vector points more in the horizontal direction, more of that probability mass is concentrated on the 0. And then similarly, the y-coordinate corresponds to a 1 in the same way. A more vertical state vector means you're more likely to see a 1 when you read out from the computer. Now, notice, because the 2 probabilities should add up to 1, after all, something is going to happen, x squared plus y squared should equal 1, and geometrically, this means that the state vector has a length of 1. So you could think of it as being confined to a unit circle. More generally, the state vector for a quantum computer will always have a length of 1, and you can think of it as living on some very high-dimensional unit sphere. This 2-dimensional example has a special name, which I've already mentioned. It's called a qubit, short for quantum bit. The analogy with a classical bit is that when you read out from the computer, you see either a 0 or a 1, but other than that, it is a completely different animal. Mathematically, a qubit is a unit vector in a 2-dimensional space, together with a coordinate system where these 2 perpendicular x and y directions correspond to the 2 values that you might read out when you measure. You should know there is that added bit of complexity that I'm postponing, but this is 90% of the right idea. And again, you have this funny rule where when you measure the qubit, seeing either a 0 or a 1, the vector then collapses to fall onto that corresponding direction. So unless something is done to prepare that qubit back into a diagonal direction, any follow-on observations that you make are always going to show the same outcome. It's very possible that at this point you're thinking something like, okay, Grant, this is a super bizarre set of premises you're asking me to accept, and if so, you are not alone. What I'm describing, as you can no doubt probably tell, are basically the postulates of quantum mechanics. There are many systems throughout physics, like the spin of an electron or the polarization of a photon, that have this property, where the outcome of a measurement is random, and our best laws of physics have us model the state of that system using a vector just like the one I'm describing here, where squaring the magnitudes of that vector's components give you the probabilities for seeing various possible outcomes. That actually has a special name. It's called the Born rule. This idea of a qubit is basically meant to be an abstraction over many possible systems like this, in just the same way that a bit is meant to be an abstraction over many possible physical systems that can toggle one of 2 directions. Now, the symbol that I've been showing, by the way, is used throughout any subject with the word quantum in its name to refer to a unit vector in this state space. And what you put inside that ket is often going to give some kind of readable meaning for what that vector represents. So in our example with the qubit, the unit vector to the right is often shown with a 0 inside the ket, because if that's the state vector, it means you deterministically read out a 0 from the computer. Likewise, the unit vector in the vertical direction is represented with a ket that has a 1 inside of it. And if you go on and read more about this, something that you'll very commonly see is that instead of writing down a general qubit with a column vector, the way I've been showing you, a lot of people like to write it as an explicit weighted sum of these 2 unit vectors in the 2 coordinate directions. That's a very physicist kind of convention. Now, classical computing has this idea of logic gates, certain basic operations like and, or, and not, that you can use to process bits and that you can string together to create arbitrarily complicated functions. Analogously, we have what are called quantum gates, which are certain fundamental operations that you can apply to a qubit, or to a system of multiple qubits. And they always look like somehow flipping or rotating this state vector. Now, I'm not going to delve too deeply into the details of all the different quantum gates. But if you are curious, I'll show you an example of what one of them looks like. Here's a very standard one known as a Hadamard gate, and what it does is it maps the unit vector in that horizontal 0 direction into the diagonal northeast direction, and it maps the unit vector in the vertical 1 direction into that kind of diagonal southeast direction. You would very commonly use this to take a deterministic state, something that's either a 0 or a 1, and turn it into something with a 50-50 equal balance, or vice versa, too. This is just one example, but there are a number of others forming the building blocks for quantum computing, and the art of writing an algorithm in this setting is to somehow compose a bunch of different quantum gates together that will progressively manipulate and flip and massage this vector until it points almost entirely in one particular coordinate direction, presumably one that actually answers a question you care about. Now down with the simplest example of a qubit, you only have 2 coordinate directions to work with, so you would be constrained to answer simple yes-no questions. And although I can't illustrate a geometric vector with more than 3 dimensions, in principle, a system with k qubits is going to have 2 to the k distinct coordinate directions, one for each bit string. So if you can somehow manage to coerce this vector to point along just one of those directions, you could potentially answer some more interesting question, carrying more information. Maybe one of them represents a prime divisor in a very large number you're trying to factor, or maybe one of them represents that secret key value from the opening puzzle of this video. Even though the potential power of quantum computers has a long tradition now of being greatly exaggerated, insofar as there really is potentially more power there, one of the key reasons is that the size of the state vector grows exponentially. As few as 100 qubits would already imply a mind-bogglingly massive state vector. But the catch is that you have no direct access to the values inside this vector. It's effectively invisible to you. The only way it can be useful is if you have a way to manipulate it in such a way that all of the probability, or at least most of it, gets concentrated on one single component, and if that component corresponds to an answer to a question that you care about. Grover's algorithm offers us a really great example to actually see how this looks, and it's high time that we get there. Let me offer you a very high-level preview for how it looks. I promise I will explain all of this in more detail, but here's the bird's eye view. It initializes this state vector in such a way that there's an equal balance of probability across all possible outcomes. One of those outcomes is going to be the secret key that you're searching for, and the tool that you'll have available, which I promise to motivate later, is to flip the sign of the state vector at that coordinate. Now this doesn't immediately affect the probabilities, but when you interleave this with a certain other operation, and you kind of go back and forth between the two of these, what happens is that the probability mass slowly starts to get concentrated over that secret key value. And at a certain point, almost all of it will be there, so when you read out from the computer, you will almost certainly see the secret key you're looking for. Okay, so that's the high level, but let's unpack it in some more detail. The first thing to address is this idea of flipping the sign of the component associated with the secret key. That might feel a little bit weird. Why would we assume that that operation is available to us? Backing up, remember that Grover's algorithm is meant to apply to any problem where you can verify a solution quickly, even if finding a solution in the first place is hard. Examples here would include solving Sudokus, finding valid coloring of a map where no 2 border regions share a color, or countless tasks throughout cryptography, where security often depends on a certain value being hard to find, even though for pragmatism it has to be easily verifiable. We began this video with a generic stand-in for all of these problems, where you imagine some function that takes in any number from 0 to n-1 and returns true on one and only one of those. In principle, we'll think of such a function as being built out of a bunch of classical logic gates. Those logic gates act on some binary representation of the inputs, and the final output is either 0 or 1. Now here's the key point. Grover knew that given any ensemble of logic gates like this, you can translate it into a system of quantum gates, so that if in the classical case, the function takes in some binary input and returns a 1 for true, then in the quantum case, the effect of all of these gates is to flip the sign of that state, the state associated with the same bit string. And then similarly, if in the classical case, the function maps some binary input to 0 for false, then in this quantum translation, the effect on the corresponding state would be to leave it unchanged. And then more generally, because all of these quantum operations are linear, if the state is a combination of multiple pure coordinate directions, then the effect is to simply flip the sign for the component associated with whatever bit string triggers that classical function. It means that if you have any NP problem, anything where you can quickly verify solutions, you're able to create an operation on a quantum computer that flips the sign of a state vector at the position corresponding to a solution of that problem. This might feel kind of useless at first. After all, flipping signs doesn't affect the probabilities, but Grover realized that this could be used in conjunction with another step that slowly amplifies the probability of that key value. And there's actually a really nice way to visualize his algorithm. To set it up, let's imagine that our state vector has only 3 dimensions. Obviously, in principle, it would be way bigger, but this lets me draw the first picture. The 3 directions here would correspond to the values 0, 1, and 2, and the whole problem statement here is that one of those values would be a secret key that we're searching for. Many different quantum algorithms will begin by putting that state vector into a kind of equal balance, where all of the components have the same value. And I want to give that equal balance vector a name. Let's call it B. I hope you don't object too much to me simply declaring that this is possible without dwelling on the underlying quantum gates that make it happen. In this case, it essentially looks like a big pile of Hadamard gates, but all you need to know is that this equal balance direction is abundantly accessible. So, starting from here, the goal is to somehow coerce this vector to instead point up in that secret key direction. And what's very helpful for the visualization purposes here is that throughout Grover's algorithm, the vector only ever moves inside the 2D plane that's spanned by these 2 vectors. So what I'm going to do is draw everything on that 2-dimensional slice. And this is going to give us a faithful representation even when the full dimension is way too big for me to draw literally. The convention I'll use here in drawing that slice will be to put the secret key direction, whatever it is, along this y-axis, and then the x-axis is going to represent something that's in equal balance of all of the other states, the non-key states. So in our very small 3-dimensional example, if that secret key was the 2 state up in the z direction, that would mean this perpendicular is an equal balance of 0 and 1, which sits on the xy plane perpendicular to that z-axis. Notice, the fully equally balanced state, B, has some component in that secret key direction, since by its definition, it has a little bit of that secret key within it. Instead of drawing this slice from 3 dimensions, here's what it would look like if it was taken from some larger number of dimensions. It's almost identical, but the main difference is that that equal balance state vector gets closer and closer to being perpendicular to the secret key direction. Crucially though, this angle is never quite 90 degrees, since that balance state always has a little bit of that secret key value inside of it. In fact, calculating this angle is going to be essential for understanding the runtime of Grover's algorithm. This is the main bit of math you actually have to do for it. You can find this angle by taking a dot product between the balance state and the key direction. The components of that balance state vector are all going to look like 1 divided by the square root of n. Since, remember, it needs to be true that when you add the squares of all of these, it would give you 1. Since the key vector is 0 almost everywhere but 1 in one of the components, it means that the dot product between these two is 1 divided by the square root of n. And if you know a little about dot products, you'll know that this is also the cosine of the angle between those 2 vectors. I'm going to translate this fact a little to make it more useful for our purposes later. This is the same as saying the sine of the complementary angle down over here, which I'll call theta, is 1 over the square root of n. And for really small angles, the sine of theta and theta are approximately the same. So if n is very large, we can safely say that this angle is about 1 divided by the square root of n, as long as it's measured in